All right, welcome to the Nametags Chat podcast. We have every week we have interesting and accomplished members or people from the adaptive community who have shown perseverance, innovation, building communities, and ways to find solutions. Today, we have someone who is connected with the adaptive community. It's a huge treat for me. She's actually coming to us 2 a.m. in Tanzania. You're in Arusha, I assume, right, Sarah?
Yeah, that's
And
right.
so Sarah Rejman was our liaison when I climbed Mount Kilimanjaro. And I feel like, honestly, anything I really know about Africa, I feel like I've learned from you. So I hope that's a good thing for you. I hope you don't say, no, I didn't teach you that. But anyway, Sarah has joined us. We're going to get to talk about the Plaster House, which she founded the Plaster House, and we'll tell you what the Plaster House is. It's an amazing thing, a resource for so many people in need who are going through medical, whether orthopedic or plastic surgery kinds of issues. Kids who are going through that. But we'll get to that. But I want to go back a little bit because you know what? I don't even know how we got connected with you. I think it was through Dave Penny, who was my guide,
Mhm.
right? Is that how did we get connected with you when we came to Tanzania? Because you were a godsend to us. You helped us so much.
Thanks, Chris. It's really nice to chat with you. I got a random email from a retired neurosurgeon who has links with the work that we're doing in northern Tanzania. And it basically said, well, my son-in-law is connected with this guy who thinks climbing Kilimanjaro in a wheelchair is going to be a hit. And could you help him discuss what the healthcare rehabilitation situation is like in northern Tanzania?
And you were working with a hospital at that point, weren't you? Were you doing outreach for a hospital, and he was affiliated with it as well, right? How is that true?
Well, he was part of a conglomerate who would come and or helped build a hospital back in the day. So I think that must have been about 30 years ago, and or even longer. And so he was working with this Lutheran hospital, helping get equipment over here, raising funds for the construction of that hospital. And I started the rehabilitative surgery program under that hospital. So every time he would come over, I'd get to see him, get chatting, and he knew what I was doing here. So.
How long had you been in Tanzania before we came there? I mean, that was we arrived first in June of '08.
Right. And so I'd been living here for 4 years, or the better part of 4 years by that point. Yeah.
I mean, some things are strange, right? I mean, because I remember the first time we came over, and it was a long flight, and I went out for sort of like a jog in my everyday wheelchair to kind of get the kinks out after being there. And I said to you afterwards that people were staring at me
Mhm.
like I was on television, not like I was a TV star, but like I was on television. Like I would wave to them and they wouldn't stop staring. They continued to stare. And you said to me, well, one, you're white, two, you're in a wheelchair, and three, nobody's pushing you.
You don't see that. You know, you don't see that.
You don't see that, but I also, in traveling around with you, you had an amazing ability to disarm people because we would go somewhere and we were in some of these remote places, and you would come in with the red hair and the white skin and the Australian way of giving people a bit of a hard time, as I understood it, all in Swahili. And people's heads would snap and go, what is going on here? I mean, it was completely, I assume that that was by design, but how did you end up in Tanzania? Like, why come here? What brought you here?
I ended up in Tanzania almost quite by accident. I was looking for something different to be doing. I was living in New Zealand, in a town called Wanaka at the time, and I was looking for something different to do. I'd been challenged by an old boyfriend of mine over dinner to follow my dreams instead of just let life unfold. And one of my dreams was to do development work, or aid work in a developing country, a third world country. And I was an occupational therapist working in a private practice, largely doing work with people who, like you, had had an accident that had ended them up with some kind of disability. So my job was really working in that community. And there was an advertisement in the local newspaper for an occupational therapist to go to Tanzania as a volunteer. And that was it. I applied for the job, and 5 months later, I landed in Tanzania. It was, Tanzania could have been in South America for all I knew. I had no idea where Tanzania was, but I grabbed hold of it and said, yes, this is mine. I'm going to do it. So I was here for 2 years, the first time, and working out in a rehab center about an hour out of the major city, Monduli. We went there. There was this rehab center out there, and I loved being here. I hated being here. I loved being here. It made me feel totally alive. I loved what I could do here to help people. And I went back to Melbourne and worked there for just over a year, in Australia, and then felt the pull to be back here in 2006, and I've been back here ever since.
Now, what's the pull to be in Africa versus being in Melbourne? Because I'm sure you were doing great work in Melbourne and in Wanaka. I actually skied in Wanaka, so stayed in Wanaka and skied in Wanaka. So I have most certainly been there. That's different than than Arusha.
I felt so alive living here. I loved that what I was doing was really helping communities of people rather than individuals. And I loved the feeling of actually a little bit what you described, that, that I could disarm situations. I knew the language. I'm a little bit of a natural actress. I don't mind being the
A little bit?
center of just a little bit. I don't mind being the center of attention, and it sort of unfolded. It unfolded from there. I saw a need that needed to be met, and I was able to really plug that gap.
Now, is there a spiritual part of this as well for you? The reason that you're in Africa? I mean, you've worked with a Lutheran hospital and those kinds of things.
I've always struggled with the term. Let's say at the beginning, I really struggled with the term of being a missionary or being
Mhm.
called a missionary or those kinds of things. And yet, I believe it's pretty well what I do, who I am here. I don't really, I'm not sent by a church. I don't feel it as a calling to do this, but I do think that there's definitely a spiritual element to the work that we do.
What's the issue with the term missionary is that you have?
I feel like missionaries got sort of for me, it was sort of this negative connotations that that we were coming over to convert the heathens and, you know, preach the word of God. And I don't feel that that's what I do. I think probably the overarching what I'd say about the work that we do is that we live the word of God. You know, we live it. We live the gospel. We don't preach the gospel. And I've become more comfortable with that. That's one way to skin what the work that we're doing here.
So in some ways, it's a more personal pursuit. In some ways, a personal pursuit that you have with your own sense of spirituality and your own sense of what's right and what's needed and how you can help.
Yeah, that's right. Definitely. Yeah, it's a sense of mission that has driven me to where I stand now. Definitely.
What did you think of us when we arrived? What did you make of us and our
Okay,
idea?
so let's really complete the picture here, Chris. And so here's Chris, who's gone off and done his exercise jog in the morning, and staying in a hotel somewhere between Mount Kilimanjaro and Mount Meru with a team of, I mean, I'm sure my memory doesn't serve me right, but was it a team of 30 people or something?
No, it wasn't that big. It probably seemed that way. There were on that first trip. It was Amanda, Dave, Patrick, Mike, John, John Lawrence, who was our doctor,
Yeah.
Meredith, and me. I think so. So I think it was actually just 6. We seemed 5 times bigger, apparently.
Oh, there were only 6. Wow. Maybe it was just the amount of gear that you guys were carrying.
That's probably true.
That's probably right. So I think that was, I mean, really, you were here doing a recce at that point, and sort of, I know that Dave went and jogged up Kilimanjaro. That normally takes people 10 days to go up and down, and he'd already jogged up Kilimanjaro 5 times that morning, kind of thing. I mean, that guy was just like so laid back, and yet physically like he could do anything. And you know, I
The beauty
came
of
out
that
and
is that it's a slight exaggeration, but it's only a slight exaggeration because he went out the first day and went to Kibo that first day and kept going through each hut, and the guides were saying, "Oh, he's okay," you know. And Dave told me when he trained in Crested Butte to go to like the Himalayas that he would do 3 14,000-foot mountains in a day. And then he would run up to the top of one and then run down and then run up to the top of the next one and run down and run up to the top of the third one and sleep on the top of the third one. So he was well trained, but he was a freak of nature as well. I mean, continued to be a freak of nature. But yes, so David run up to the top of the mountain 5 times.
and then I came in, and you know, and we were going to get on a tour and go and see a little bit of the backside of Tanzania. The backside. That's not what I mean by that. But you know, the it's like the B-roll of what you were going to eventually shoot with One Revolution and the movie. You know, it was really, I feel like, the setting of the scene almost. You know, this is the country that you're in here, and this is the situation. And I remember the line was, you know, you're going to be shining a light back on people living with disabilities over here. And I really believe that that's what you came to do. But I was a little bit intimidated. You know, I can stand up in front of a couple of hundred people and spiel off in Swahili, and here was this sort of like groovy group coming over from the US, and you know, with a movie crew, and I was yes, vaguely intimidated by that.
That I had no idea. I had no idea that you were ever intimidated. You seemed to jump right into the group and take charge. And it's interesting that you're saying that it was kind of the B-roll of the movie, but it was also a part of Tanzania that a lot of people don't get an opportunity to see. I mean, we went to Kilimanjaro. We did that part. People see that part. We did do in Tarangire. We did do a brief safari and saw some of the animals, but we also saw a lot of the hospitals and a lot of the rehab places, and we drove through. And and for me, I think it was really helpful because it gave me a sense of what we were doing. I mean, remember you introduced us to Emmanuel. How did you get to know Emmanuel? Do you remember?
Let's put this
Because
part
there are
of
probably a couple of Emmanuels in
he's
your
like
history.
one of 5,000 plus patients, but he also had an accident, Chris.
No, so the story, as which is a heartbreaking story, as I was told, is that he was active as a kid, and that his mother had actually tied him to the bed so that he wouldn't kind of roam and stuff like that, and that he ended up getting a disability as a result of it. And it was kind of a little elusive in terms of quantifying what exactly it was, because I think there was some sort of there might have been some sort of a head injury as well. And he was it was amazing because it was this heartbreaking story of really a kid who was actually abused, but he had the kindest, most open heart of anyone you'd ever met. Like, I mean, he just seemed like the picture of purity.
Yeah.
And you introduced us to him, and we met his family, and we actually, you know, helped him a little bit. He went to a trade school.
Yeah, that's right.
And it's funny, this is some of the education that I ended up getting from you, because I asked him at one point, and I think we were filming and we wanted to catch his story, and Amanda did an amazingly beautiful story of of Emmanuel. And one of the coolest parts, I thought, because he used like a stick to a certain extent as kind of a crutch to get around. And we went to, I'm trying to remember the name of the wheelchair manufacturer in Arusha.
Mobility care.
So we went to Mobility Care, and the opening of this film that Amanda did has the sound of Emmanuel, where he's on the pavement, on the cement, and you hear the boom of the stick, and then sort of this shuffle, and it's really it's percussive, it's musical, it's lyrical in a lot of ways. And so we met him and actually helped him out to a certain extent with going to this trade school. And I asked him at one point, you know, like we'd like to help you out, and what would you like to do with your life? Do you remember this at all? I mean, granted, you've seen a lot of patients.
It's vaguely remembering. You tell the story.
So I asked him, what would you like to do with your life? And he said, well, I'd like to be a shoe shine guy. And I remember talking to you afterwards, and I was like, wow, like that's too bad in some ways that this guy doesn't, you know, we'd like to help him out, and it's too bad that he doesn't have bigger dreams. And this was a part of the education for me, in that you informed me about, like, sort of the temporary nature of life, where people, where it's not like being in the US or being in Australia, where you think, okay, well, this is my big plan, this is what I'm going to do. And you said that's a realistic plan
Mm-hmm.
for him. not to have this grand dream of, well, I'm going to go to college and go to medical school and become a doctor and do this or do whatever, and it's like, so it was an interesting, it was an interesting cultural
Mm.
experience for me. What's informed you? Because I'd imagine that you probably came into Africa in a similar way that I did, where you thought, okay, because I mean, you're a little bit of a, we're gonna change the world, we're gonna make this happen, we're gonna move forward. And when did you kind of run into this is an entirely different culture than I expected, and had to change your direction? Did that
Yeah.
happen early on?
Yeah, I'd say that was part of my sort of my evolution here in the first 2 years. So in my first 2 years, when I was living out of Arusha, I was one of very few white people living in this village out an hour away. I spent a lot of time. I spent a lot of time on my own. I spent a lot of time reflecting. I spent a lot of time working out, or sort of resetting my mindset, I guess, and it wasn't always pretty. It's so I think that I really learnt in those first 2 years about, and sort of coming as an occupational therapist, where we are almost trained to assess somebody with where they are already at. That's actually what we're trained to do, is to assess a situation and match match a response, or match a treatment plan, or those kinds of things. That's the core business of an occupational therapist.
And so that was shocking in some ways to determine somebody's current situation. Was that, is that how it ended up working for you, that all of your experience didn't, you're like, okay, now I've got to throw that out, and I've got to improvise?
Yeah, absolutely. And I need to work with what I've got. I was working with people and getting the best quickie wheelchairs and different J2 cushions. I mean, this is we're talking 25 years ago, so I'm sure
Sure.
it's outdated. All the best cushions and all of those kinds of things. What kind of wheels, what kind of casters you're going to have on your chair, and then you come to Tanzania and you can get a steel wheelchair made at Mobility Care. And that's the only answer that we can have to somebody who can't walk. I also, of course, came in with these very idealistic ideas around people living with disabilities. Well, of course, we're going to do this and this and this. So I had to learn the same, and as I say, I'd learned this in the first 2 years. I had to learn the same as you did, that actually these bite-sized chunks are okay. If he wants a shoe shine stand, that's great. He doesn't need to own 20 shoe shine stands and employ the shoe shiners. And that's the way our community and our village life really, really works here.
Is that part of what's appealing for you in being there?
Yes, I think so.
It was also interesting to me, because you talk about people who might need a wheelchair, or you talk about, I mean, even like if somebody dies, that the community comes together to help fund whatever's needed. The village comes together and helps
Mhm.
fund, which happens to a certain extent in other places. But was that something that was profound for you when you saw that happen?
The sense of community has always been a major draw for me. That feeling of community, the feeling of people coming together and helping each other, of mourning together, of celebrating together, and yes, of helping each other out. So people with next to nothing give their contribution to the other person who is in trouble at that point in time, you know, in trouble with their lives at that point in time, because that's the insurance scheme. You pay to help that person out. You know that person's going to give a little bit when you come in 6 months' time and need some kind of assistance. And that real sense of community and working together, yes, to me is just, I love that. It's
How embraced were you in the community? Like when you first came in, were you embraced? Did you have to fight your way in, or how did it work?
I had to charm my way in, Chris.
Well,
Well,
you're
I had to learn Swahili. At the workplace that I was in, they'd had several volunteers go through before, and it's almost like they challenged me to work out whether I was made of tough enough stuff. So there were times where I was excluded because I was the white person and people would speak in fast Swahili around me, and it wasn't always, well, I mean, it wasn't always easy. It wasn't easy. So I didn't arrive and come in as the white savior. You know, I really had to work to cement my position, to sort of chisel out and then cement my position in the community, doing what I was doing with helping children with disabilities access the services that they could access.
that they said, oh, we can, that like she's going to help us. So we trust her, kind of, no, like after you had already helped them, kind of thing. Did you know any Swahili when you first
No,
arrived? No.
no, none. None, none. So I arrived first in 2002, in November of 2002, and I was sent off on a 3-week language course, and that really taught me a lot of the grammar. And I have always had quite an ear for languages, but then Swahili, of course, it's a Bantu language. It's a totally different language from anything that we would ever learn at school, or you know, any of those sort of. I learned French and German when I was at school, so you know, it's not French and German. But I worked with children, and a lot of the children who were coming in also were learning Swahili. They were coming in and they only spoke their tribal language. So they were learning a language and they were teaching it to me along the same lines. So they would say to me, oh, you don't say it like this, you say it like that. You know, "Sio hivyo." That was the way that's the way the conversation would go.
That is awesome. And kids are so good at teaching a language too, because they're not like a teacher teaching from on high, but it's just like, no, this is the way it goes. And they're not going to sugarcoat it either for you.
Oh, that's right. And that's right. And they're not embarrassed to correct you. It became a game. You know, they weren't embarrassed to correct me, and yet they didn't let me just gloss over it. So
Wow. And so these other people who had preceded you in your position had sort of cycled in and out after a few months.
yes, a few months or even a few years, and people would still make a difference in that time. Like they definitely would make a difference. And having lived here for a long time in a place where there's a lot of cycling through, you get a little bit jaded with the people who are coming in for a short period of time, and you kind of think, and then what, you know, and then what, and it's quite a bit of investment as as you'd be aware, it's an investment to build a relationship and to work into some kind of either working relationship or friendship, and then for that to go.
Yeah, and it's a lot of promises too. I think that's one thing that you warned us about. It was not being overzealous and not wanting to over promise.
Mm-hmm.
And it's funny. I always feel like in the position that we're often in, because sometimes we're teachers, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we're teaching, and I feel like teaching is often a completely unfair dynamic, because the teacher often learns more than the student does.
Yeah.
If you're really perceptive and you're doing that, and I felt like as we came through, with this idea of like how we wanted to help and what we wanted to change. And Emmanuel totally changed my view of disability. We actually helped another guy. We gave him a wheelchair. And I remember coming back and we saw this guy. We just saw him in Arusha. And he said to us, he said, my life has changed. And we're like, well, all right. Like that's exactly what we're looking for. But it wasn't what I had envisioned.
Mm-hmm.
And what I had envisioned was, okay, like this guy's independent and he's on his own and he's doing it. And he actually, as a result of having a chair, told us that it got him a better corner where he could beg on a better corner, and he was actually employing somebody to push him to this better corner. And I'm going, okay, all right.
Yeah.
That's like cool, but not exactly the way that I imagined it. And I think that it must be for you that, I mean, it's just been 25 years now, right? That you've seen things, but I saw, it's funny just sort of driving around, because we drove around, and the most common toy that we'd see is that little, the like little wire loop with the stick, and the kid running along with the stick. And what struck me was just how happy people were. How you see people who seemingly have nothing, and we're surrounded every day by people who seemingly have everything. And
Yeah.
it's amazing how many people who seemingly have everything are so unhappy, or trying to figure out how to be happy. And the people who seemingly have nothing have found a way to be happy. Is that one of the things that has struck you? And have you been changed by seeing simplicity in a way that you might not have imagined it growing up?
Yes, it really has changed. It's definitely changed me. It's changed me in my own life with what makes you happy, what fills your cup. It definitely has. It's of course, as everybody knows, it's not all roses, of course, when you can't always feed your kids at the end of the day in these communities. But you're right, life is a little bit simpler here. Expectations generally, especially with the population with whom I'm working, it's simpler. The expectations of the kind of work or the outcomes of the work that we're doing are very low, and it's always gratifying then when a parent might come and pick a child up and go, wow, I never, excuse the cat. Yeah, so, but I've definitely, it changes, it's changed the way I work, it's changed who I am, how I live, what my expectations are for my own children, and I do take that wherever I am now. It's not to say that I can't go and shop with the best of them, but it's it's just it's a very different way of living life and what your expectations can be of life.
You didn't have any children when we first met you.
No, that's
You have
right.
3 girls now.
That's right.
You weren't married even when we
And
first met you.
no, 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 that was 2008. I think I was footloose and fancy free back then. Imagine. And then yes, I'd already met my future husband, but we weren't dating back then. And then we ended up we got married in September 2009. And I think that I must have seen you just after that. Did you come back in October 2009?
So 2009, we came back actually. So you must have gone and gotten married when we were on the mountain, because we were on the top of the mountain on the 6.5 day. So on the 7th day, really, on the 30th. So we were on the mountain from the 23rd through the 29th, or 23rd through the 2nd of October, something like that.
Right. Yeah. We got married on the 12th of September, so just before you got into town.
I think you kept it
Imagine.
relatively quiet. I don't remember knowing about
On.
this.
That was the girlfriend conversation that would probably happen in the back of the bus.
Hey, by the way, I just got married. Yeah.
By the way, things have changed. And yeah, then we've got three beautiful girls who are growing up here in Arusha. Yeah.
And I did get a chance to go to their school in December when we came back to celebrate our 10-year anniversary, the international school.
Yeah.
How has doing what you've done, living where you live, how has that changed the way that you've raised your daughters, or the story that you tell to your daughters, or hasn't it?
I mean, I don't know parenting, I guess, in any other way or in any other place. This is where my girls grow up, and they watch both my husband Jack and me living the dream. I don't know, living the dream, but sort of circling back to what I said at the beginning, to be living the mission in our lives. So Jack has a small Medivac company and is a pilot, and established this business to be carrying people in, out, and around Tanzania, moving them to a higher level of healthcare. And the girls have grown up before they could crawling, walking, as the plaster house has grown as well, and they know more than they can understand about ability and disability. So part of my oldest daughter is in her last year of primary school this year, and part of what they do is the UWC, the United World College of East Africa, which is the school they're at, is they take a group of children from the plaster house with the group of final year of primary school children out into Tarangire and go camping out there for 2 nights and experience working with these Tanzanian children with disabilities at the same time that they're on their final year camp. And I found that something that was relatively normal. And my aunt was visiting me from New Zealand at the time that they were just doing the parent presentation on the Tarangire camp. And she was blown away by what this meant and what it meant for the children, and in particular what it meant for the international school children and what they were going to gain out of this incredible experience of being out in a Tanzanian national park with children recovering from surgery for a disability, who'd never been out in a national park before, who'd never seen the animals that people see, or that you see, the safari animals. And here were our children who were going to be part of this amazing process, and the gift that our children were getting from that was just huge. But it took somebody from outside to tell me that, oh my goodness, this is outrageous, for me to realize that actually, yes, it was outrageous. What an amazing experience.
Outrageous in an absolutely spectacular way.
Absolutely spectacular. Awesome way. Yeah.
Now, I mean, you're talking about the kids from the Plaster House, you're talking about the kids from the international school, but you're also talking about Tarangire, where all of the animals are. And I remember that we went to a lodge there where Dave's in-laws or family or somebody had a lodge there. I forget exactly what the relationship was. And one of the daughters took us out, a daughter who is around our age, took us out in a Jeep where the top had been cut off and there were no doors on the Jeep. And we're driving through, and it was just Dave and me with her. And this is a huge treat that we're getting our own private little tour. But meanwhile, I'm looking in the grasses the whole time, because it's a dirt road and all these long grasses. And I'm looking in the grasses for like the female lion.
Oh yeah.
Who's going to pluck me out of this Jeep. So these kids are going to effectively there with all of these animals. Is that, am I correct in understanding that? Because that part sounds significant too.
Yeah. I'm such a responsible parent, sending my daughter off willingly into that situation. But yeah. And as part of this school trip, they get out and they play football in those long grasses with the kids. Yeah. Because they're not in a lodge; they stay in tents in the public campsites.
Wow,
Awesome.
That was an awesome place to see. I mean, we did not see any cats while we were there. We were there briefly, which was a little bit disappointing, but it was also just amazing. And you were so helpful. I mean, much to the chagrin probably of the ostrich, because I think the ostrich were effectively in heat, and you were describing to us that the male ostrich. I mean, this is effectively like this is middle school, like as bad as it could possibly get, right? Because the male ostrich essentially like turns its legs turn pink, basically, right? To show that, and which I'm sure elicits the response from the female ostrich of like, oh yes, I know all of what you're all about.
Yeah.
And no, it's not going to happen.
Exactly. No, and we were potentially vaguely amused by the fact that it's the male who goes on heat in this particular species, as opposed to the female. And it serves them right that they're turning bright pink from the tip of their nose to the tip of their toes. Bright pink red. That's kind of like they're taking one for the team for the whole male species of every animal everywhere. It's bright red.
I think that's the most brutal experience of anybody who's ever had that middle school dance experience. It could be much worse. You could be an ostrich.
Yeah, exactly. turning bright red once a month. I don't know how often it is. Wildlife's not my specialty.
I
Or
don't
my
know. You
nose
seem to know something
often
there.
goes pink.
So we saw the early iteration of the plaster house a long time ago. So that's when we were there. I believe that was in 2009. Is that when you founded the plaster house, just prior to that?
2008. So
2008.
you actually came and visited the plaster house, I guess 2 months after its inception. It started in April, May of 2008. And it started with 9 beds, and we thought maybe 12 to 15 children at a time. Mm-hmm.
And what's the objective? What's the mission of the plaster house?
Basically, what had happened was that I had been given the job or given the challenge to bring in more children with disabilities from a large outreach area to have treatment at the Lutheran hospital where I was working. So we were bringing in children from the villages, from these outreach villages, and we were treating them and sending them home, and then they were to come back for follow-up appointments.
And
And we
these are
were
long distances too, right?
long distances. And even if they weren't long distances, we were losing people for follow-up. So parents failed to get the money together to bring the child back in for surgery. Children had come in with bent legs. They went home with straight legs in POP, in plaster casts, and parents would cut the POP off and say, oh, okay, well, the legs are straight now, off you go. Or kids would
Which
come in
undid the
with
surgery
yeah,
effectively.
undid the surgery. Yeah.
Okay.
Or they missed their appointments, and so they'd come back in, and there might be infections on the inside of the plaster cast, or they're cohabitating with stock, and so they would have ticks and fleas and all sorts of things on the inside of the POP. It was, and you need a good diet, as for healing. You need a good diet to get over surgery. It's actually, there is a little bit of a science and an art to healing after you've had surgery. And so we're talking about corrective orthopedic surgery, plastic surgery, pediatric neurosurgery, and we were sending children out to the village. So the premise basically was that we had a place for children to stay after they'd had surgery and to rehabilitate before they went home. So they'd have the surgery, we'd bring them in from outreach, they'd have the surgery, and then they'd stay with us until they went home. So it was really to be a home away from home, a place where we could give them a really good diet, look after them, keep them close to the hospital if there were any issues with the wounds, or with the plaster casts, or with the healing process. We could get them back to the hospital straight away.
And it's just children, not parents, just children.
Mamas stay with the children if the child is breastfeeding, or if the child's situation is precarious. But generally, we send the mamas go back home, or the parents go back home and leave their child to be cared for by us. And part of the reason is that this child with the disability is more often than not, one of many children that mama will be looking after. A child will stay with us for sometimes 3 to 6 months, and that period of time to take mama out of the home is a really long time. So we look after the child in that period of time. We have a whole staff of house mothers who look after the children and care for them as if they were their own.
Is it still hard for these mamas to leave their children with you?
But I think that somehow we come back to that sense of community, the sense of community where everybody helps out financially. It's sort of, it, they say in Africa, it takes a village to raise a child. And the plaster house and the plaster house staff and the plaster house setup it becomes part of that village. So in 2008, it really was, by that time, I think one house mother or maybe two house mothers, a driver and me running the facility. That's how we started, with the dream of maybe 15 children at a time.
And now you have a beautiful campus
Yeah.
that I visited, and how many children can you house on this campus? How has it grown?
We house typically up to 150 children at a time.
150 children.
Yeah, 150 children at a time, in all stages of the process. So we have a therapeutic feeding program that helps get children strong enough to have corrective surgery, through the corrective surgery process, and staying with us still until they're fully rehabilitated. So in 2013, we opened a 48-bed facility. Again, thinking that this was going to be the the final number, but it really has been a case of build it and they will come, and they came. And so in those first 48 beds, we'd have over 100 children. So in 2018, we opened an expansion to 80 beds. So we have 80 beds currently. And in mid-March, before we needed to decrease our throughput a little bit, we had 180 children in those beds. So we really did sort of build, or I guess fill a hole that maybe I didn't even realize needed to be filled.
Or how big it really was.
How big it really was, and how big the need is all around the country. We started our outreach in a relatively small area in north central Tanzania. Our outreach now goes a lot further. We provide it, or we do this outreach with a whole lot of different modalities. It's not just jumping around in the back of a Land Rover any longer. We're using media, social media. We're empowering other people to refer us in these children, and they are. The children are there.
Wow. And what are the outcomes? Because you're filling such a need, and then I'd imagine your outcomes have been significant as well, in terms of how much more successful the surgeries have been. Is that true?
Absolutely. And both with orthopedic surgery, we've got a nursing staff who do the dressing changes following plastic surgery. So plastic surgery surgeons don't come over here and do facelifts and eyes, and although I could probably do with it somehow.
You look beautiful. No.
They come over here typically and work with children who are born with cleft palate, so cleft lip and palate. They work with children who have been burnt, and when they've healed from their burn, their skin has contracted. So they are typically, not able to straighten their fingers out, not able to lift their arm, because the scar has healed in a way that means that their joints are constricted. So that's the kind of plastic surgery that we do here.
Wow. And but and then when they've gone back to their villages, then they've been more productive. They've been
More
happier. They've
functional.
been healthier.
Absolutely. It's always about the function. It's always about the function. We look at a child and is surgery going to help improve their function? That's what we look at. Is this child going to be able to walk with less pain because his knees aren't knocking together, and therefore be able to either herd the goats with his father or hopefully be able to access some kind of education? So we're this year launching a research project to really look at our long-term effect on children's lives, and so that we are really following through on how has this changed your child's life? You know, bent legs, straight legs, but what impact has it really had on your child and on the family? How has this made life easier?
Wow. I would imagine do you think that you are going to be surprised when you get the results of this? I mean, you've been surprised by the numbers already, but do
Mm-hmm.
you think you'll be surprised by the outcome, by the impact that you've had?
Yeah, I, I,
And it's not you specifically. I realize it's a team of people.
as a program, I'm expecting that we might be humbled by the kind of information that we get back. And that's why we see more children coming through every year, because
You might be
parents
humbled. What do you mean by
understand.
that?
Humbled by the impact that we actually have. So yes, surprised, but surprised and yes, and humbled as to the major impact that I think we have on children's lives and changing the face of disability in Tanzania. You know, our vision is that no child should live with a treatable disability, and that's a lofty vision, but I really believe that's where we're headed, and transforming communities is all part of that. Transforming a community's understanding of disability, understanding of children living with disability. We're already seeing the changes, and I guess the research is going to back this up, but we see the changes in that children are getting referred into us as newborns now, as opposed to seeing a child who was born with clubfoot and it's taken 2 or 3 years to get them into us and they're already walking on the clubfoot. Now we're getting so many more children in as newborns, with hair, with cleft lip and palate, with clubfoot, with other congenital abnormalities.
And so people are effectively making an investment in their children through you now,
Yes.
and in their future, and the future, not just of the children, but of the whole family and really of the community, which is a far more tightly knit community. So the ripples are pretty profound.
They really are. And it's interesting in Swahili, sort of, you talk about an investment. We actually ask parents to make a financial investment as part of the Plaster House program. So the program is donor funded. We fundraise, we raise funds to treat these children with disabilities. So just throwing it out there, but it costs us on average $850 to look after a child from the beginning of treatment right through the end of treatment. And we ask the parents to make a financial contribution to the care of the child. And usually this is between 2 and 5% of the total cost. In Swahili, the word for free is the same as the word for worthless. And what we say is bure ni bure. Free is worthless. So we ask the parents to make a financial contribution to the care of their child. And and we explain that, and then it is then the parents who we say, you're the ones who brought your child for treatment. You're the ones who've made the contribution for the treatment. It's not the crazy red-headed white woman who's looked after your child and treated your child. You treated your child. You made the investment. And that also makes for a better long-term story, because then there's much more likelihood that the child's splints are going to be worn, that there's better follow through beyond that initial period of treatment and rehabilitation.
They have skin in the game.
Exactly it.
You told us that when we were there, and that was something that made a huge impression on me, because I think there is always the thought of, well, we want to help somebody. And this impression of you want to help somebody, but you also want them to be invested in helping themselves, and to value what's going on. The idea of free is worthless is you get what you pay for too. And it's something that's informed some of what we've done with schools. I mean, we do a lot of school presentations in the US, and it's the same kind of thing where we're looking for an investment from the school, because it is worthless if they don't have to make something. So now this is home for you. Is this home? Is this home for good? Is it, or I mean, you never really know for sure if anything's for forever, but
this is home for us. This is home for us. We've had some big challenges as a family over the last few years, and this is where we want to be. It's where I see the growth of the Plaster House happening. So where we're at the moment, or having come back into Tanzania after a chunk of time, I see the Plaster House runs really well with a really great administrative team here. And I was challenged to think, what will be next for Sarah if the Plaster House is running well? And what's next for Sarah is to have another Plaster House somewhere else in Tanzania, to be able to treat more children closer to their own homes, to be investing in the capacities of a surgical hospital somewhere else in Tanzania, and to get funded children through a corrective surgery program somewhere else in Tanzania.
Well, I mean, the kids, anybody who comes in contact with you, Sarah is a lucky person.
Thank you.
Not to embarrass you, but I think that's the case, definitely. And can people go? I know you have a Facebook page. The Plaster House is a Facebook page. You have a website as well.
We have a website as well. It's called theplasterhouse.org. And we have just set up a 501c3 in the United States called Friends of the Plaster House, that is supporting the work of the Plaster House over here in Tanzania.
Wonderful. So if people want to learn more about the Plaster House, they can go to the Plaster House page on Facebook, or Plaster House, theplasterhouse.org?
Theplasterhouse.org.
The Plaster House. It's important that you can one letter off and you end up in the wrong place, right? But theplasterhouse.org. And if people want to contribute and help, I mean, it's absolutely amazing. One, the work that you're doing to help kids, the work that you're doing to help families, to help communities, but to educate people like us coming in and visiting Africa, and hopefully helping a little bit, and having a little bit of an impression on some people, and trying to tell that story. It's a collective story that I think we have to continue to tell. And so, Sarah, I so appreciate you talking to us from 2 a.m. to 3 a.m. in the morning. Will you go back to sleep now, or do you just start your day?
I have to, open all the bedroom doors so the children can, get the noise again. But no, it's been a pleasure to talk with you, Chris. I mean, it's 12 years since we first met, and you really have made a huge impression on me and my family, and working together and showing you a little bit of our corner of Tanzania has always been a pleasure of mine. It's always fun. There's usually a beer in our hands, it has to be said, rather than a cup of tea, but you
make do with what you're nothing if not flexible, right? And one of the highlights of last year certainly was getting to show our film with you, and that to me was just, because it was always the hope of being able to share that, and hoping that and probably more so to Jiri's story, the porter who climbed with us, than my story. But Wes, the guy who,
Chris, the name tags presentation at my girls' school was slated as the best presentation, the most impactful presentation for the whole year. And I mean, we do have a number of people who come through and do different kinds of presentations, but you really captured the whole audience, the whole staff. So come back. We'd like an annual appearance of Chris Waddell in Arusha.
That would be wonderful. I would absolutely love that. Actually, your headmaster there paid me the highest compliment. He said, I'm really mad at you because you've articulated what I've been trying to say for years. And I was like, oh, thank you.
There you go. Seriously, it really is. It's really awesome, and it's very impactful what you're doing.
Well, thank you. Well, the more opportunities we get to work together, the better things are. So I will do my best to return. But Sarah, thank you so much. Please, I hope you're not drinking coffee. I noticed there's a mug, but I hope you're not drinking coffee and can get back to sleep. So
my teapot.
There you go. Perfect. It's a complete treat. Thank you, Sarah. Keep up the great work. And people out there, thank you for joining us. You'll be able to see this on our Facebook page, on the One Revolution Facebook page tomorrow afterwards. It'll also be uploaded to YouTube later on to the One Revolution YouTube page. And so please follow us, but also please follow Sarah and follow the great work that she's doing. And maybe we'll get back and see you in Arusha. That would be absolutely wonderful. So thank you so much.